Welcome, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and sitting in the Faithful host seat this week is Pastor Gerald Schutzke, and sitting in the guest seat is Michael Binder, who is the senior White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal, whose coverage of President Trump has been recognized for his deep sourcing, balance, and valuable behind-the-scenes portrait of the Trump administration. And we're here to talk to him this week about his most recent book, Frankly, We Did Win This Election. So thank you for coming on our show, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I have to say, I've been really looking forward to this interview specifically for a while because I find it really fitting that we're doing this interview in August. And I have an inside source from a pillow dealer of mine who told me there's supposed to be a presidential inauguration soon in this month. So I'm wondering, as a journalist, if you have any insight on the location and date of the presidential inauguration.
Assuming we're not talking about the president of the United States, maybe president of something else, but because the next presidential inauguration that I'm aware of is going to be 2025. So.
Okay. All right. Just keep me posted. I follow you on Twitter, so if you get any, good sources or something, I'm really interested. But your book is probably, well, number one, your book is in a crowded field of a lot of different books about Trump. I've read a lot of them, and I really, really like your book. And I'm not just saying that because you're in front of me. Like, if you weren't here, I would say the same thing. And it's a really easy read. It's got parts in it that's really funny. It's got parts that are really witty. I really enjoy.
It's fast paced as well. It's good. Yeah. It was a very good read.
Thank you so much.
And your writing style is really, really amazing. And I, one of the things I think I found intriguing about your book, and I'll have you speak on it here in a second, is how you, like, the main character of your book is obviously about Trump, but it's also about the Trump voters. And specifically, you chose to kind of write the book through the eyes of Sandra Kaczynski. And her name shows up in your book all the way from the prologue to the, credits, epilogue. And I love to hear, like, how did she become so central in the story of your book?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. And the kind words about the book, it really means a lot to me. I mean, first, because I set out to write that kind of book. I wanted to write something that was accessible to that you don't have to be steeped in Washington or steeped in politics to understand, the players and behind the scenes. And, I've been covering Trump for the Wall Street Journal since 2016. I've written 1,100 stories. I looked it up. I've written over 1,100 stories for the Wall Street Journal that have the word Trump in them. Like, I don't really want to read another Trump story, like I you know what I mean? Like, in the sense of, like, I know all of it.
Fair.
I wanted to give people something, if you weren't following it day to day, or if you were following it day to day, a reason to turn the page and a reason to read the next chapter, and try to make it very readable and feel like it was an adventurous year, right? I mean, I wanted a number of adjectives you could use. But I wanted the book to feel like that. I wanted it to, to have that kind of fast pace for the reader. So I really, really do appreciate you saying that, because it was one thing that I was really going for. And I'm also really glad that you brought up Sandra and some of the Trump supporters here. I mean, there's also, I say, as someone who's written a bunch of about Trump, but there's no shortage of Trump books, like right now in this moment, or over the last 30, 40 years. There's an entire pantheon of Trump books. I mean, the one thing I will say is, like, I think this book is unique in the sense that it comes at Trump in three different ways that I don't think any other book does or will anytime soon, which is behind the scenes in the Oval Office, which we've seen a lot of the headlines. It had some nice run on cable news. The Mark Milley yelled at by Trump about wanting to shoot protesters, and I go behind the scenes in the campaign. This is sort of the second piece of it, which is like another scoop of that was, Hannity writing ads for the Trump campaign. I have exclusive memos and some never reported scenes in there too. And the third piece of it is the Trump supporters. And I'm effectively embedded with a handful of these folks for 2 years in order to better understand the movement. And these are the folks who go to all the rallies. And I mean, all the rallies. We're talking 30, 40, 50, 60 rallies, right? And what I wanted to do was two things. I wanted to understand them not as Republicans or necessarily as Trump supporters, but as people. And what about them as Americans? And what about them as humans? Made them want to come back and see the same show over and over and over again, even though it was Trump or anyone else. And then also like what it was about Trump that drew them in. And so I got to know a handful of them really well. And you mentioned I do thank them in the acknowledgments. I am just really humbled and honored that they let me share their story and trusted me to tell their story, and was really it gave me as some really big insights into the movement and made my reporting, I feel like, much richer and much more fulsome. And you mentioned, Sandra ends up being kind of the main character in this group that I focus on, and it's kind of just a matter of circumstance. She wasn't necessarily the one I was closest with, like at any particular time or anything, but she ends up being the one who keeps traveling and is alive, right? I mean, some of these folks die along the way, and is there at the end, and is there on January 6th. And sort of earnestly just telling me that it's no big deal. We're it's not really, no one's there to cause any trouble. They're just there to overthrow the government, which is what she tells me. At the time. So, it was. I feel like it was. I feel really lucky to be able to tell this side of the story, and I do think it's one of the unique things about that sets this book apart from the rest.
Yeah, it's almost I'm sorry, real fast, Gerald. It's almost like every news story that came out about Trump in the past year, there was an anecdote from Sandra about like how her reaction was, whether it was, you talked about the Tulsa rally and her being afraid more of Antifa than COVID, to like you said, to the January 6th thing. And it was really, really fascinating just to kind of see that world through her eyes. And, if she's listening to this, I just want to thank her because I really think her experience is sort of the experience that most people that don't follow Trump really need to understand, because I think that's a driving force for a lot of what we see.
It really didn't come into focus for me with Sandra until the very end, until I realized that she was there on January 6th and had been going, and then I look back and she was at all of these major moments, and honestly there weren't a ton of them because the campaign was so truncated with all the other things going on. But it was at the end of the year or the beginning of this year rather, that I realized that, while the rest of us, most of the country, right, is locked down. I barely left the house for most of 2020. Sandra earned frequent flyer mile status on Delta, I think it was, and was like, and was sort of surprised and had to be told like what I have the scene in the book, whatever platinum, whatever the status was. Like she had to have it explained to her because she had never, it was not a goal of hers. It wasn't a thing, right? And she ends up earning freaking flyer status in 2020 because she's just out and about and following Trump, which is pretty amazing.
Well, I have never been to a Trump rally, so your explanation of what it's like for people being on the ground there and meeting those people were fascinating to me. And the way you described it to me was less like a political campaign and more like a rock concert, like that feel of getting in line, like wanting to be the first ones in there. And it just seems like Trump seemed to attract almost a religious adherence to himself and to his talking points.
Yeah.
From your perspective, why do you believe he was so successful filling stadiums with fervent followers? And why do you think what he said resonated so well with the people that came?
Yeah, and I think I think that's the right takeaway from these rallies. I've told people, I don't think I put it in the book, but I've described it before as like a cross between a tent revival and a Rolling Stones concert. And there is there's Trump gave them. I mean, Trump first brings people know Trump, right? Like people have known Trump for a long, long time, and and so they don't have to be introduced to him, and he already has. I mean, we as a culture put so much, credence in celebrity, right? If you're, I don't know how long. I think I was writing for newspapers. My newspaper career was like maybe 15 years before I was on TV for the first time, and it wasn't until I was on TV for the first time on like Bloomberg News, a channel that most people don't even know they have, right? That my family realized that, hey, he might actually have a career here. He was on TV, right? And these are my family, my loved ones. It's just as a culture. So Trump already has this sort of cachet with so many people because of his
following.
Yeah, and then and then there was this sort of unrest, right? I mean, it wasn't because of Trump. I mean, you can trace it back however far you want. I mean, I remember seeing some of these things on the campaign trail in 2008 with Sarah Palin. And going to some Palin rallies and feeling the same, similar vibes. Before Palin, Pat Buchanan sort of seized on some of these, similar dynamics. So then Trump comes in and his, unusual way of speaking, right? I mean, the coarseness that turns off so many people it ended up attracting even more, or maybe not more, but others, because in a weird way, it was this sort of it validated. They wanted someone from outside Washington, someone to come in and a bull in the china shop to come to Washington and break things on their behalf. And a lot of these folks saw Trump's refusal to be politically correct, his insistence on fighting back, as in a way that validated that what they were looking for, right? That for them was proof that he would go to Washington and
stand up for them.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they sort of took that next leap, right? And I mean, what ends up happening, and I think what 2020 and what this book kind of details is how many of them were sort of misled along the way, or put their hopes and dreams and trust in Trump in a way that was never really repaid, or at least the way that that I think that a lot of them had intended. Which I also think is a reason that it's still so important. I think one of the reasons why this part of the book is resonating right now, even 6 months or whatever after he's left office, longer now, I guess. But Trump is still drawing thousands. He drew thousands to Ohio, right? In at the end of June, thousands more to Florida in July. And this is after January 6th, right? I mean, there have been 500 people facing criminal charges. People are starting. Not just people, Trump supporters are facing prison sentences now, or getting sentenced to prison now. And so it raises the question of why these people are still coming back, right? Why he can still draw these crowds. And I think this, understanding some of the front row Joes here, these Trump rally goers, gives a little window into, into the, Trump phenomenon.
Yeah, it's interesting. In your book, you talked about a particular situation where Trump was trying to, ask the DNI director at that time, Ratcliffe, to chase down these theories from Sidney Powell and others and whatnot. And I read the book before the most recent, news that came out about him pressuring some other DOJ folks, about stuff. And you read these two things. Well, you read the first one and you're like, wow, that seems bad. But then you read the second story that almost corroborates the intent. And you're like, wow, that's really bad.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, if you think, there will be more stories like that coming out as, people learn about them, FOIA requests are made, and so on and so forth.
Yes. I mean, I think that we still have a lot to learn about the run up to January 6th and what happened on January 6th. There's still I think there's still some unanswered questions about what led to the riots. And then certainly on January 6th, there's still really big gaps of what we know about what Trump was doing and saying and thinking and how he was acting on while that was all going on. I do think this book gives the fullest accounting we know so far, particularly in the run up to January 6th. And yeah, I mean, I was reading those stories just the same about Trump pressuring the top DOJ acting attorney general and some of his deputies to question the election results in Georgia. And what the detail I have in my book is that it was earlier than we ever knew, but Trump wanted to get rid of Bill Barr early November, right? And when Bill Barr finally resigns in mid-December, I tell a story in my book about how Barr said he wanted his deputy, Jeffrey Rosen, to be the acting attorney general. Well, Trump doesn't think Rosen is pliable enough and reaches down one more level to Rosen's deputy, Richard Donahue, who he knows a little bit better. And Donahue, again, is Rosen's deputy, right? Like he's loyal to Rosen first and foremost there, and tells Trump, no, like I'm not going to take the acting spot, but I'll take the number 2 under Rosen. So Trump ends up naming Rosen as acting attorney general. And I say all of this now, and I think it's worth like recalling right now because had Trump found someone, Rosen is proven that his loyalty is to the Constitution, what he took an oath to, not the office of the president, right? And certainly not Trump as a person. Had Trump put in, had success putting in someone who was more, loyal to Trump, or some of the sort of sycophantic types that he had around him, how different things might have turned out. I mean, there are some, as it turns out, there are some key players here in these final weeks. Rosen, we're learning, Mark Milley. I mean, Bill Barr had to be talked out of quitting, in December over the election fraud accusations. There's some good, January 6th was horrifying, right? And in some ways, almost an inevitable coda to the Trump's 4 years. But I think what we learned in this book and what we're learning more now is how much worse things could have been.
One thing I really, while reading your book, I really got the sense that you wanted to be fair and you wanted to be well researched. I'm a conservative, so I think that's a badge of good reporting, good research. When I can say, I feel like you're just trying your best to tell the truth.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering, is there any stories that you found while researching? I believe sometimes truth can be stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
Anything surprised you that was true that you didn't think was true, or vice versa? Like something that maybe is commonly reported about Trump that actually ended up being false. Did you find that to be the case at all?
There are some things. I mean, I don't know about the last part of your question there, like some sort of like sort of like conventional wisdom about Trump that turned out to be not true. Nothing like jumps to mind. I'm sure there's something. I mean, there were definitely some whoppers that this is the difficulty of covering Trump. Like a lot of people think that this is an easier job than covering Biden or Obama or Bush. Because there's so much happening and there's so much, there's so many leakers and all that. But the thing that overlooks the difficulty of covering Trump is, I'll put it this way. I've been a newspaper reporter for 22 years. I've covered county commissions, city councils, school boards, state legislatures in Ohio, Colorado, Florida, before coming to DC. I have never, the Trump administration, the Trump White House is the only place I've ever covered, the only government body I've ever covered where, 5 people can go into a meeting and 8 versions of that meeting, come out. I mean, the only way to cover this is like you have to talk to everybody that was there. There's nothing in this book that is single source. There's nothing in this book that I take anybody's word for, because I said there were some whoppers, and I meant more of like, I mean, people I respect, people who I view as professionals in the business, whether government, politics, that sort of thing, who told me things that they were sure was true, and that then multiple people that would have known denied. Right. So it can be really, and that just sort of like get you all turned around. Okay. Well, like this was someone I trusted. Either like 10 people are lying to me, or like I put my trust in so like there's a lot of, you go through these things that I don't think you had to covering Bush or Obama. I mean, there's generally agreed upon, things that happen in meetings or in the White House on any given day. So there were a handful of those things that like, I mean, they were wild enough where I wanted to nail it down and couldn't put it in the book. And then the first part of your question, like a lot of it was surprising to me. I mean, we kind of start this conversation talking about how, you guys find it like an easy read, right? And like, that's what I sort of went into this thinking of, like, that was going to be the thing. Everyone knows the story of Trump, right? You don't have to be covering it every day for the Wall Street Journal, like I did in the building. My mom in suburban Ohio, people across the country, the headlines you couldn't escape it, right? From your phone to your cable package to your newspapers, like there was no avoiding the story of Trump, and particularly the story of Trump chaos, right? So I wanted to inject some like a feeling of what it was like to cover him, and make it a good read. But then when I started reporting this book after the election and going back and reporting some of the big scenes, there was a lot that I was surprised by. I mean, I was shocked by how many people around Trump, high up, it wasn't the chaos they were concerned about, but they become concerned about how dangerous they thought he was in this desperation to hold on to office. Right. I mean,
that surprised me as well.
Yeah. I mean, Trump wanted to shoot Americans. Right. I mean, people protesting civil rights abuses. This is not a once off. Right. I mean, he told defense officials, military officials multiple times to shoot him in the leg, shoot him in the foot, that he wanted their skulls cracked. His own Secretary of State thought that there was a chance he might lean into some sort of foreign entanglement in order to strengthen his own argument for remaining in office. That's Mike Pompeo, one of his most loyal cabinet members, one of his most powerful cabinet, longest serving. So I mean, these were the things that were that shocked me when I was reporting this book, and the more shocking stories that I included in there.
I talked to a lot of reporters and a lot of different people when they get assigned, their beat, and so I heard from one where they're like, a year ago they were so disappointed that they got on the infectious disease beat, and then COVID hit, and I'm curious, like back in 2016 when you started covering Trump, did a part of you say, oh man, why do I get Trump? Why don't I get Cruz or, like Rubio or Jeb or something like that?
Yeah, no, I definitely have my version of that story. So, I was working at Bloomberg at the time, and before I came to Washington, I'd worked in Florida for 7 or 8 years. I had covered a couple of different newspapers, the Palm Beach Post and the Tampa Bay Times. I'd covered the last year of Jeb Bush's term as governor, and I'd covered Marco Rubio as state House Speaker down there. So I know those two guys, and they were all but in from early, right? I mean, Rubio was getting ready to run in 2016, and as soon as he had gotten elected in 2010, frankly, I mean, he was on his way. So there was a moment, I think it was in 2015, where there was some chatter around the sort of editing table, kind of like going through plans and targets for reporting with the political team. And I'd been assigned Jeb and was checking in on Rubio a little bit too. And so Trump came up, the subject of Trump came up, and someone cracked their wise, made a joke about Trump. I don't remember what it was, but, pointed out that, Trump was at that point was closer to the top of the polls than the bottom of the polls, right? I mean, he was, it was pretty fluid, right? Like we sort of knew what the sort of top layer looked like, but there wasn't a lot of separation in the field early on. And, the editor turned and said, Mike, that's a good point. Why don't you check in on Trump here and there? And I said, whoa, not me, guys. I'm covering the front runner, right? I'm covering Jeb. I didn't mean me. I meant like the intern or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I didn't see it coming. I mean, I did think once Trump took over the polls that I was pretty sure he was going to win the Republican nomination. Like he had taken over the polls. He had a couple like crazy comments that no one thought he was going to come back from. And it didn't even register. So I was pretty sure that he was going to win the nomination. But then when he won the nomination, I don't know, Hillary Clinton was on paper the most qualified presidential candidate, certainly of my lifetime. That it's more complicated than that. Obviously, winning the presidential race is not a battle of resumes, but and she had just beat Bernie, who was drawing thousands of people into arenas himself. So I looked at it all and said, well, just because Trump is drawing all these people doesn't mean he's gonna win the election. And so then I basically I talked myself out of it again. So yeah, I got my face definitely a couple of different times, at least in that 2016 cycle.
Wow. One of the surprising things that I learned in your book was there was a couple other players that were kind of key in Trump's circle that you don't really hear a whole lot about in the press, and two of which are Mike Pence and Melania.
Mm-hmm.
And with Mike Pence, I mean, there's in the book, you portray him as sort of one, that of like subservience, and except there was like an encounter, I believe, where Trump thought that he stole one of his people.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if it was Corey Lewandowski or something like that. And but I'm curious from your point, like how does Pence or does Pence have an effect on Trump given his role? Especially, he was very media adverse, and I don't think he's a bad guy. I had Olivia Troy on here, and she talked a little bit about Pence. Said, "Hey, I actually think he's a pretty nice guy."
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious on what influence did Pence have over Trump?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I agree. I think Pence is a very decent, polite man. I say that as a fellow Midwesterner. I write about it a little bit in the book. I don't, in June of 2020, I go to interview Trump in the Oval Office for the Wall Street Journal. I ended up getting left alone in the Oval Office for like a half an hour. And at one point Pence comes in and, to your point, I mean, he says he heard I was there, wanted to say hi, asked how the family was, knew I'd had a baby recently, asking how the baby was, asking me to come back on if I'm going to come back on the campaign trail with him sometime soon, that sort of thing that it would never occur to Donald Trump to ask me, right, about my family or what so yes, they're definitely different approaches and different personalities. I have a hard time kind of answering your question about like what the effect is on Trump. I mean, I wrote about, there was only one time where I can find in 4 years of covering these guys, 5 years including the campaigns, where Pence actually pushed back on Trump and, didn't sort of, just sort of like roll over or, was more than anything more than a speed bump to Trump, in Trump's path. And that was when he had hired Corey Lewandowski at Jared Kushner's request. And then, as Mike Pence, then he had gone back to Trump and talked it through with him. But then by the time the news got out that he had hired Corey Lewandowski, which was a couple of months later at that point, Trump had forgotten and thought it reflected badly on him. Trump thought it was during the Russia investigation and thought that it looked like his people were fleeing the ship in order to, find safe harbor with Pence or something, and accused Pence of being disloyal, which Pence had proven otherwise every single day, right, for years at that point. And that was the one thing that caused Pence to sort of blow his top. And I tell that story in there because when we get to January 6th, in the run-up to January 6th, there were some people around Pence who were telling him that you need to give Trump have another one of these get your facts straight moment with Trump. And as furious as you were back then about those accusations, is as furious as you need to be now about his insistence that you can overturn a free and fair election. Pence and his people think that he was clear with Trump in those debates. I interviewed Trump a couple of times. We talked about this a couple of times. It wasn't so clear to Trump.
Oh. Well, I was just wondering, my heart, my vocation is a pastor. Mm-hmm. So as I was reading through your book, I really enjoyed it, but I was just having the heart for the people that you brought up in the book. And the reality is our country's been pulled along in the wake of Trump's divisive speech and at times selfish politics, leaving what feels like an insurmountable political divide in the country. Being someone who has spent so much time interacting with both political parties and with those that follow them, is there any common ground that you can see that can help heal the divide?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. And you were kind of getting at this a little bit earlier. And that I wanted to be, accurate with this book, and which is why I mentioned before I didn't put anything in there that's single source, make sure that everything was verified or documented. But I also wanted to present these people as humans, and certainly the Trump supporters. I think I'm very careful with them. I tried to be in how I presented them and told their stories. But even all the way, up the chain to Trump, I try to give, some sort of, I want them to feel like humans. I want these people to be human, in order to get to what you're saying, which is, so much of politics has become, red versus blue, right? What jersey you're wearing, and all of, and a battle to the end over that alone. And I don't think that is going to ever be fixed until, we can look at each other from the other side of these things and see that that there's it's another person, right? That we're all Americans, we're all people, and we're all, might be coming from different opinions or be coming from, different points of view, but you have to understand those points of view. You have to make an effort to understand where each of us are coming from before you can, get to, the finer points of some of these bitter policy debates that are dividing us. And yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap, really. Even just in like the front row Joes that I talked about, these Trump rally goers. A lot of them are Obama voters. A lot of them had been drawn to Obama's energy in a similar way they had been drawn to Trump's energy and sort of celebrity and, sort of outsider status. And there are some policy overlaps. As much as Obama supporters and Trump supporters don't want to admit it. But one of the things that immediately comes to mind is foreign policy. They have different approaches, but both wanted to end the endless wars, right? I mean, they both ran against Iraq essentially, right? I mean, and the need for us to be more careful about where we, to pick and choose more carefully where we get involved in with the military. And there's some other things too, but it's certainly the sort of the two ends of the most conservative. There is overlap between like the very, very liberal wing of the Democrats and the very, very conservative wing of the Republican Party on a number of issues. But I think I think until we are willing to sort of admit that the person across from me is more than just a Facebook handle or more than just and able to sort of set aside our road rage when it comes to politics.
That's a good word for it.
That it's just that it's going to be difficult to get past. But I appreciate the question because that was definitely one of the things I had in mind when I was working on this book, and I did not want it to feel like a screed, like that it was going to be that this is definitely a Democratic book or this is obviously a Republican book or which would maybe have made it a little more easier to sell. But I think it was just too important of a moment to do that with the people in office and the people who support them.
I can definitely get that sense from you that you were trying to make some common ground between people. I can see your heart in the book. I was wondering, have you received any blowback from both sides? Like oh, you're just making stuff up, or why didn't you talk about this horrible thing? Have you received blowback from both sides?
Oh yeah,
being such a middle of the road book.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, like the title right away confuses people, which I kind of thought was fun. And I mean, I didn't, it's sort of weird to talk about, like I wanted the 2020 book to be fun, to be a fun read, but I did. And so the title alone just kind of confuses people. And, I've had some liberals like threaten to protest different events I've had just based on the first half of the title. And that's literally all of the research they did was to like look. They didn't not even like the rest of the title or like a single headline or anything written about the book. And the other side too is any right. I mean, from Trump supporters. I mean, this is another unique thing for me covering politics at any level. In that Trump supporters viewed any criticism of him, in very personal terms. They took complaints and criticism about Trump as complaints and criticism about them, which had this effect of just like tightening their bond to him, right? So any of like I try to be fair in the book, but I mean I do make some judgments along the way, and anything that sort of like is painted Trump in anything of a critical light was fake or made up, or I've definitely had that. I mean, Donald Trump himself put out a statement calling me a third-rate reporter, which I worked on the book for a long time. I mean, I've known Trump for a long time. He knows how many people I talked to for this book. He knows that people who don't normally talk to reporters were talking to me for this book, and that's what had worried him the most.
You should put that on the front of your book as a quote from him, so that I'm sure more people might even pick it up.
Well, I do have a quote from him on the back of the book of him complimenting my hair, which is actually the kind of the essence of my relationship with Donald Trump. Every time I've seen him, every single time, he's complimented my hair, which I took as a very deep compliment from someone like Donald Trump, and also relieved. Like had he put out this statement about me and attacked my hair, then I would have really known that I was in trouble, that things were bad between the two of us if he, had said something disparaging about my hairdo. So I did feel lucky he left that out.
That's really funny because I was going to ask you about that. I mean, as a person, as a non-hair ally, And so is Gerald. You know, like you've got way better hair than both of us. You've got hair that we don't. So, you know, out of all the lines in your book, that there's one paragraph that I thought was just, I don't know. It was like the chef's kiss. I read it to my wife a couple weeks ago, and she started just dying laughing. And I'm gonna read it to our audience so they can hear it. So it says, information in Trump world obeyed two basic laws of physics: Kepler's law of planetary motion and Newton's theory of gravity. The first held that every piece of hearsay and every nugget of news, no matter its size, shape, or significance, was effectively its own celestial body in a constant elliptical orbit around a singular, magnificent Trumpian sun. The second truth was that the giant orange star at the center of the universe was slowly pulling each object closer. So, number one, like, that's amazing. I just got to tell you, like just that image that you're able to portray, you know, and mind you, for those that haven't read the book, it was in relation, it was regarding Trump, like giving Melania's number out to friends so it can circumvent like his chief of staff from like listening in to his calls. So
yeah, I was trying to describe kind of Trump's management style and how this is sort of effectively kind of undermines. He sort of explains all of the troubles he's had and for yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if you made that your book title, it would have been amazing. It's kind of wordy, but
yeah, I obviously don't mind wordy titles. So.
But to that end, like why would Trump not want, I guess, his chief of staff listening in to his calls?
Yeah, I mean, it's this sort of Trump was his own best chief of staff, right? He was his own best chief of staff. He was his own best communications director. I mean, he said on TV that, you know, he was his own best military advisor. You know, he had the best brain. And I mean, I have you know, I describe a scene in the book around the George Floyd protest where he also becomes like his own, you know, conference call operator, where there's this call with the 50 state governors and they're trying to, you know, go through like the, you know, moment, the situation on the ground in that moment. And it's Trump who starts saying, if anyone else has questions, press, and what he actually says is like #2. So, you know, it was always, he has a hard time, I think, trusting, putting the kind of trust in people you need to in order to empower someone like a chief of staff or, you know, some of these agency heads or even, you know, major offices and, you know, senior staff in the White House. You know, if you could get him information, if you could get him some sort of tidbit of news or something that validated our existing point of view, that was immediately going to be more important than anything the chief of staff or the White House counsel, you know, had told him in the past. And again, we see that play out in the book by January 6th, where people like Rudy Giuliani, who'd gotten him impeached already the first time, and Sidney Powell, who, you know, had been, you know, playing around in conspiracies for a long time to that point, Cleta Mitchell, you know, these attorneys have immediately more credibility to Trump than his White House counsel, than his attorney general, you know, his own director of national intelligence, right? Simply because they have information that sort of furthers his own agenda or his own point of view.
Yeah, that's true, and you definitely allude to that at several times, even like with Brad Parscale giving him information that just was that was just wrong, but made him feel good. Yeah, and I just thought, yeah.
Well, it comes out of this. I mean, really Trump weird. Is he makes his name in real estate, right? I mean, it's kind of, we all sort of associate him with that, but he actually makes his money in branding, right? He's a showman. He's a salesman. He's a reality TV star, and none of those are not pejoratives. I mean, that's his expertise in branding. And I mean, in that sense, Brad was almost oddly the kind of perfect campaign manager, even though he'd never run a campaign before. But he sees the value in branding. He's an advertising exec, and no one really. I mean, Obama a little bit, but no one had sort of put as much emphasis on branding as its own engine for political energy, like Trump had, and that's what Brad had seen. But that also sort of mentality, right, has of kind of imposing your own reality on the situation to make a sale, to get someone to tune in, ends up being his management style when it comes to, huge crises like, the pandemic and, the most widespread civil rights protests in decades, the biggest economic collapse since the Depression. And I think what we see and what the book kind of lays out is that maybe that management style was maybe not up to the task of handling those kinds of situations.
Yeah. Now you mentioned George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a part that I was really kind of surprised. So, Gerald's earlier question, was there anything that you were surprised about, when writing it? And for me, the surprise in reading the book, specifically around the George Floyd thing, was Trump was troubled when he watched the video,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually showed like a sense of compassion, where he was trying, he activated his AG and was really looking like for some sort of resolution. And I found that really fascinating, because, I mean, you don't see that side of Trump ever publicly. But you have to just assume that, okay, he's human, so he probably has feelings, and I thought it was interesting that you captured that. So can you talk just a little bit more about
definitely.
maybe the softer side?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a good scene to talk about. I mean, I had the same reaction when I heard that the first time, and that was definitely one where I was like, I'm going to need a couple more people to verify this one.
Yeah.
But what it reminded me of was early on in the administration when Trump authorizes a strike in Syria after a chemical weapons attack out there. And what did it for him at the time was the pictures he saw, was the videos he saw of children, of babies who had been the victims of the chemical weapons attacks that were happening out there. Trump is he's a visceral person, right? He learned, he reacts and learns and best through less by reading and more by pictures and images, right? I mean, he's and again, I'm not. Everyone learns, everyone has a different. That's not a criticism in any way, but that's kind of what I pieced together here was, by the time he gets the video, which I do make a point of saying, like, it's a couple of days after Floyd is killed. Much of America had watched the video for themselves by the time someone puts it in Trump's hands to even watch in the first place. So, but then he sees what the rest of us see, which is a horrifying, 8-9 minutes there that little girl in Minnesota captured on her video on her telephone, on her mobile phone. But two things. One is he doesn't watch the whole thing. I mean, he's disturbed enough where he can't even bring himself to watch the full video, which I think is an important detail. Particularly as someone as the president of the United States, who is going to be tasked here with, with corralling the country, getting with the country's response to this. George Floyd's death and the protests in the immediate aftermath had nothing to do with Donald Trump, right? And it's not in some ways it's a political opportunity here for Trump to bring us together and to try to cross this divide that the countries failed to cross for centuries, right? And he doesn't even watch the full 8 minutes, and then almost immediately it becomes personal to him. Almost immediately he sees these protests as protesting Trump. Almost immediately he's telling people, and I detail this in the book too, he pushed through criminal justice reform. He got money for historically black colleges and universities, permanent funding, X, Y, and Z. And now they're protesting, right? And the blacks are never going to like me. They're never going to vote for me. And this was all bullshit. I never, and why did I even do this in the first place? Right? I mean, I don't know how, like, there's very few. It's an odd way to piece all these things together, but I think also helps explain why almost within days here his reaction goes from one of compassion and like, oh, I've heard about these kind of things, and in Queens we had cops like this, and a relatable reaction to this furious law and order image that he wanted to project, to the point where he wanted to send uniformed active duty military troops into major U.S. cities, into the nation's capital, to put down protests, which is just, a remarkable moment, not just in 2020, but, in the nation's history.
Yeah. Now with all the time you spent in Trump world, do you think January 6th was predictable with what happened?
I mean, in hindsight, and as a journalist, like I can, the easy answer is yes, and I do describe it that way in the book, that this is a horrific, if inevitable coda to Trump's 4 years. Now, and that it was really, when you look back. Trump had been promising this very thing. Not that he was going to riot, not lead a charge on the Capitol, but he'd been, telling us for years that the only way he could lose was election fraud, right? That no other politicians were to be trusted, that the courts were not right, that he was always going to be acquitted, that he'd never fade away, and here is the moment of truth for him, and what happens. And kind of I detail here in the last chapters is everyone around him. Trump isn't, after the election's called, Trump is not furious. He's not foaming at the mouth like Mark Meadows sometimes described him in the White House, which gave people around him this sort of false sense of security that Trump was going to find his own way to concede. Right? He just needed. Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the Republican Party, Mike Pence, Mark Milley. They separately tell people at different points in November that Trump just needs his space to get to a concession. And, by giving him space, what this does is just open the door for Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Cleta Mitchell to put their foot into the Oval Office and effectively, take over the place and tell Trump exactly what he wants to hear.
Wow. Now, my last question is, so obviously, if by the end of August we don't see Trump inaugurated and sworn in as the president, he'll have to wait till 2024. So, in your opinion, do you think Trump can win?
I don't know. Do I think he can win like the White House again? Yeah. It's a good question. He barely won in 2016, right? He barely lost in 2020. I don't think there's a clear, obvious answer. And what we saw in both of those races was that the opponent matters, and that, and how people think of the opponent. I certainly think he would have is by far the, lead, front runner for the Republican nomination, But don't sleep on 2022 either here, right? I know Trump is being very active, endorsing candidates. He's endorsed some 24 Republicans at this point. A lot of them are primary challengers, which is no easy thing to, even for a former president as popular as Trump is in his own party to take out a sitting incumbent in places like the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House. The party has a choice right now, right? They have, this is their opportunity to define themselves one way or the other post-Trump, and what that means and what that's going to look like. And I think those are going to be these results in the next couple of years, these election results are going to be, important data points for Trump when he decides whether or not to run. And I think that's what the book here does too. Is whatever which way, I don't know which way the Republican Party is going to go in 2022, but I mean, what the book shows here is that there is no excuse but to go into those decisions with their eyes wide open.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. Well, Michael, I just want to thank you. This was a fun, entertaining book, great read. If you are out there listening, watching, I highly recommend it. And I just really want to thank you for all the work you do just in journalism. You are definitely among friends here. We support journalism, local journalism, and we just support your just all the hard work you've done over the past 4 years. And hopefully, if Trump doesn't get elected, hopefully that's a good thing for your social life.
Well, this was super fun. I really, really appreciate you having me, and and an endorsement of the book like that is really meaningful, particularly from someone who's such a careful reader. I really, really appreciate that, and I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks, folks, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.